Hey everybody, this is Elizabeth with World's Cup of Joe, Awaken Your Soul. I'm so excited to bring you the first in a series that I'm going to be starting that is going to be called Soul Through History and Soul Through Literature. It's going to be different historical or literature-based works that I'm going to sort of dissect through the eyes of soul and give you what my feedback is as an awakened individual reading through these lessons and topics. So, without further ado, we are going to start with the book, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. So this first series is going to be called Soul Gone Wild. And I'm just so excited to share this with you guys. So a little background, let me start it off and read. I am so excited to embark on this new adventure that combines my love of history and literature with my spiritual awakening. Soul Gone Wild is going to be my first in hopefully a long line of highlighting soul through history and literature. This by no means is intended to be a book review, so don't look to this for that, but rather delving into some of the passages that reflect the spirituality of an awakened soul. As you continue to progress through your awakening, you will see that soul and spirituality really is timeless. You will begin to read and watch things you may have been introduced to before, but you will see a new meaning revealed. You will start seeing things through the eyes of soul. In Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, you will see that one character in particular, Lord Henry Wotton, speaks of things that we teach daily when teaching others how to align with soul. I will attempt to draw you into the soul and presence that is woven into the dialogue throughout the story. In all the books I've read over the years, Wilde and his creation of Lord Henry, with the truth he shares, left an indelible impression on me. I hope you enjoy this series and gain something, even if only enjoyment, and I look forward to creating many more opportunities to share soul through history and literature with you. Okay, I'm going to start, but I want to give a little bit of background information, and I will have a combined PDF for this so you guys can go through this on your own if you want to, look it over. So, background information, New Hedonism. One cannot study Oscar Wilde without hearing about New Hedonism. New Hedonism is a focus solely on pleasure and experience without regard to consequences of actions. It rejects societal moral codes and places an emphasis on satisfying one's desires. Lord Henry, in The Picture of Dorian Gray, adheres to this code of conduct and uses any chance he can get to share his belief system with others. Dorian Gray, the main character, gets so caught up in this philosophy that he sells his soul to live a life of pleasures without penitence. All right. Soul Gone Wild, Soul Through Literature. Most memorable quotes from Chapter 1. First, if they know nothing of victory, they are at least spared the knowledge of defeat. Basil Hallward. Signs of duality are always around us. It wasn't until my awakening that I could see duality as an intricate way that the universe speaks to us to make us understand lessons in life. A simple example are the emotions of happiness and sadness. If one has never experienced sadness, how would they know what happiness feels like? If one has never experienced physical pain, would they appreciate feeling healthy and pain-free regularly? What about love? If you have never experienced love, how would you know what it felt like to be without love? All of these are examples of duality. The more awakened one becomes, it seems like duality is always around to teach important lessons. How can you know peace if you haven't experienced turmoil? I love the quote that starts off this Soul and Literature series on duality. If they know nothing of victory, they are at least spared the knowledge of defeat. Basil Hallward. Page 6, Picture of Dorian Gray. If you've never experienced victory, do you know what it feels like to fail? It is having experienced victory, no matter how small, that makes one aware of all future failures they will experience. But take a moment to really dig deep on how valuable this is. The reason failures motivate us to achieve greater things in life is specifically because we understand the incentive that victory provides. We need duality in our lives to become better versions of ourselves and to keep achieving more both in a personal and a spiritual sense. Those that are still asleep have never felt what it feels like to be awakened. The second quote, conscience and cowardice are really the same things, Basil, said Lord Henry. Reading this book, I loved savoring the dialogue between characters. This sentence really stood out to me because what I took from the root of the quote is the ability to differentiate between mind and soul. We not only teach this to clients, but it is something we must intentionally focus on ourselves to balance and stay in soul. Our whole lives we thought we were the mind, or our thoughts. When thoughts popped in our heads, or we said things, we judged ourselves based on them. But we are not our thoughts, rather, we are soul. We know we are not our thoughts because we can't control the thoughts that pop into our heads. Soul is the silent observer of the thoughts. When you can understand and realize that soul simply watches what the mind says and does so as a third-party observer, this act will allow you to align with soul. This is a hard concept to those that are new to their spiritual journey, but it's an important one. I have a go-to question whenever I start to feel emotions like anger, jealousy, or sadness. I ask myself if soul would care about the reason that incited those feelings. The answer is always no. Once again, because soul just is. Another very important thing about soul is always living in this now moment, whereas mind can only exist in the past or the future. If something is bothering you and it occurred in the past or is yet to take place, you are in mind. Back to the passage and why it stood out to me. When someone is acting out of conscience, they are in mind. Conscience implies judgment, which is an act of mind. Remember, soul doesn't ever judge. So if you are in soul, how could you act out of conscience? Now, cowardice is the failure to act due to fear. Fear is an emotion from the mind. When Lord Henry tells his friend, conscience and cowardice are the same things, Basil, he is correct because they are both mind. In a very broad spiritual perspective, things are either from mind or our soul. There is no middle ground. Taking two seemingly different things like a conscience and cowardice, and understanding they are rooted in the same thing, which is the mind, you can see where they merge into one. Okay, third quote. It is only the intellectually lost who ever argue. Lord Henry. The next quote has so many variations in which some were written over a millennia ago. Socrates in the 4th century BC said, "I am the wisest man alive, for I know one thing, and that is that I know nothing." Another example is a Chinese proverb that says, "The wise man knows he knows nothing. The fool thinks he knows all." Wilde puts his own stamp on this idea by saying, "It is only the intellectually lost who ever argue." In referencing the ideas behind Socrates in the Chinese proverb, that the wise man will realize he has so much yet to learn, then it goes to say that an intelligent man will be able to listen to another person's perspective with the understanding that they may have an opportunity to learn something new. If the intellectually lost are the only ones that argue, it is because they are stupid enough to think that they are always right. In our own spiritual journey, this can be a very humbling lesson for us to embrace. It is easy to cling to the anger and fears of the mind when we choose to engage in an argument with someone. We feel compelled to be right and win the argument. Somehow, feeling this will bring about victorious feelings. But winning an argument doesn't always feel so great, especially when we are being stubborn and aren't able to understand someone else's perspective. I will refer to my previous question that I asked myself, would soul care about winning this argument? The answer is always no. If you are so focused on being right, you are fully in mind and not embracing soul. The mind wants to hold on to anger and animosity. It does so to be relevant and to keep you in lower vibrations on the scale of consciousness, where only mind can reside. Those are the energies of fear, anger, jealousy, and resentment. When you are aligned with soul, your vibration is in the higher scale of consciousness of peace, love, and joy. If you want to continuously be in a place where you can level up and align with soul, you will need to take Wilde's comment that only the intellectually lost argue to heart and put it into practice. Align with soul and learn to let go of the need to win, and rather just accept that maybe you have something new to learn or be open-minded about. Our next quote. Unconsciously, he defines for me the lines of a fresh school, a school that is to have in it all the passion of the romantic spirit, all the perfection of the spirit that is Greek, the harmony of soul and body, how much that is. We in our madness have separated the two and have invented a realism that is vulgar, an ideality that is void. Basil Hallward. I can't claim to know the meaning behind every passage that Wilde wrote. He lived in a different society during which the context of quotes and ideas could be misinterpreted based on our own set of cultural standards and norms. However, I am basing my assumption on what Wilde wanted to convey in this quote by the information I read about him combined with my knowledge of history. In the passage, the artist Basil is describing this affection he has for a male friend, Dorian Gray, that he has recently been using as a model to paint a portrait of. It is never overtly stated that Basil was in love with Dorian, however it is implied. In the first sentence, when Basil is talking about a fresh school of thought based on the perfection and romantic spirit of Greece, I believe he is talking about the homosexual feelings he has started to experience for Dorian. Now remember, in England at this time, being a homosexual was not allowed. Greeks were known to be bisexual, and it was just part of their culture. It was socially acceptable and the norm. Romans, however, engaged in homosexual relationships with slaves and others, but it wasn't accepted like it was in Greek, although most of the men did it. If you study the 90-plus Western Roman emperors, you will find that almost all of them had male lovers, but a blind eye was turned, and it wasn't emphasized. When Basil is talking about the perfection and spirit that is Greek, he is talking about being able to have any lover of choice and it be socially acceptable. He then goes on to say the harmony of body and soul. That is a reference to having sex and that union that can be experienced when you are merging body and soul into one. Wilde then goes on to say how society has separated the two of body and soul and has made their own rules to apply to what is right or wrong sexually. He is saying that the world in their intense judgment has made an act that should be pure, pleasurable, and enjoyable to both the body and mind, now as being perverted to rules in which man says what is acceptable or not. One of the most eye-opening books I've ever listened to was Conversations with God. One of the reasons I love this book is because the God that is conveyed explains that God's soul never judges your sexual actions if you're not hurting anyone. That sex should be pleasurable, that the body was made to experience this pleasure that was meant to be one with soul. We have been made in our society and culture to believe that we are a deviant if we enjoy sex. There are so many societal rules and stigmas that make us fearful of enjoying our bodies and exploring our sexuality. Wilde is trying to point out how great it was when soul and body could be one, and everyone could experience the pleasure of self, the way that the physical vessel was intended. There is so much judgment regarding sexuality. It makes people ashamed, embarrassed, and feel like they are an abomination, when they are just wanting to feel the harmony of soul and body that Wilde describes. And finally, our last quote from chapter 1. And how delightful other people's emotions were, much more delightful than their ideas, it seemed to him. One's own soul and the passions of one's friends, those were the fascinating things in life. Lord Henry. I love getting a chance to read such deep thoughts integrated into a story, especially when you know that so many people will keep on reading and not see the words and ideas for the depth that they really represent. In the quote above, Lord Henry really is pointing out something remarkable. Let's dissect these 3 sentences. First, and how delightful other people's emotions were. When you are awakened, you become good at reading other people's energy. Energy is powerful and it transmits extremely easily when you are in tune. Emotions, although still from the mind, often convey how one is feeling more adequately than spoken words. When Lord Henry says that the emotions were more delightful than ideas, To me, it reads because emotions are more truthful than ideas. A person can say something and it doesn't often adequately represent how they are feeling. How many times have you asked someone, "How is it going?" only for the response to be good? When you can feel from their emotions, that is not really how they feel. Now let's look at emotions when one is aligned with soul. Those emotions radiate peace, love, and joy, which are what soul is. Not only do their emotions display these energies, but they get felt by those that are around them. Lord Henry's character prides himself on how truthful he is. He doesn't parse words and he makes sure to say it like it is. That is one of the endearing qualities about him. There is nothing hidden in his meanings. But if you aren't awakened, you may not see the value in what he is saying. It may be lost on you. When Lord Henry says, "one's own soul and the passions of one's friends," those were the fascinating things in life. Think about the use of the word passions in this statement. When someone is aligned with soul, they have a contagious sense of inspiration that flows through them. To me, Lord Henry is talking about feeling soul come through the emotions of someone when they are in alignment. Not only is his soul, but in a sense, other souls, the fascinating things in life. He thinks ideas from the mind are much less delightful than being able to see soul come through someone in an encounter. Isn't this sentiment true? Wouldn't you rather be around someone that is in soul than when they are in mind? I love that Lord Henry sees people this way. It is like he can feel mind and those lower vibrations and recognize them for what they are when he's around them. This book has so many insightful and almost poetic thoughts written throughout it. Take my interpretations for what they are worth. But when I'm reading this book, I go full soul mode on, and I'm relaying messages, whether factually accurate based on author's intent or not, to what soul is inspiring me to share. Thank you again, and this is Elizabeth with World's Cup of Joe, Soul Through Literature.